Welcome back to Typepod Workshop. In this video we'll be assembling the frame of the 4-pallet workbench using the parts we've made in the previous videos. The frame's a ladder-shaped assembly built on top of the leg trestles. This diagram's only showing one of the 4 struts for clarity. We'll start by planing the lower edge of the apron planks. If you already have a workbench, this is a quick and easy job. But since we're still building the bench, we can get it done by clamping each plank to our saw stools. I'm nailing a board to the end of the saw stool to push against the brick wall. That lets me work the plane over the whole length of the plank. Once you've set up the saw stools, you'll definitely be able to plane the edge of the plank, although it's a pretty uncomfortable working position. Finish off the plank by chamfering the edges. You can also use the 2-pallet table as a temporary workbench. Here I'll use the apron we planed on the saw stools as a spacer, so I can clamp the other apron plank to the table. This method works fine, but I should have clamped the plank to the table a bit further away from the wall. Once you've finished planing the aprons, decide which sides should be hidden and mark them. Next, mark assembly lines across the inside of the aprons, 220mm, 8.5 inches, from the ends of the planks. You can mark these lines wherever you want on the aprons, but I recommend keeping at least 100mm or 4 inches of overhang past the end of the legs. Now position your first leg trestle on the apron. The lower cross brace goes to the outside and the diagonal trench points toward the apron. We'll be using screws to hold the bench frame together before we glue it. Check that the trestle's lined up with your pencil line, then drill a pilot hole through the trestle in the apron. Fit the screwdriver bit to your drill. We'll be inserting and removing these screws several times, so lubricate their threads with some candle wax before driving them in. Now fetch the strut that matches your diagonal trench and fit it into position. Use your mallet to tap the strut fully into the trench. This will mess up the alignment of the leg trestle and the apron, so use your square to recheck it. Drill pilot holes and drive a screw into each end of the strut. Use candle wax to lubricate these screws as well. We're going to fit a joist between the 2 aprons here, which will also give the strut something to push against. We'll now mark and saw the end of the strut. There are better ways to do this, but I'm just lining up the square with the apron by eye alone. Use your tenon saw to cut the end off the strut. Try to avoid cutting deeply into the apron while you do this. Now measure upwards 80mm or 3¼ inch from the bottom of the apron and mark across the end of the strut. Then make the cut with your tenon saw. Attach the second trestle in the same way, then turn the assembly over, and use the same process to attach the second apron. Always make sure you're using the matching strut for the trench. You can save a few drill bit swaps by only drilling the pilot holes through the strut. Always double check the alignment before you drive in the screws. We can now take the frame off the assembly bench and sit it upright on its own legs. Don't just leave your tools lying around on the ground. If you've done this correctly, the legs should be the same distance apart at the top and the bottom. And both the diagonals should measure the same distance. If the alignment's wrong, you can still fix it at this point by removing and re-drilling the screws. We'll need to plane the tops of these aprons and joists in the next video, but the tops of these legs are too long. Remove the 4 screws holding the apron on. Turn the bench around in the most awkward way possible. Mark a line about 10mm, 3/8 inch, from the top of each leg. Saw off the tops of the legs. You can use a coping saw if you have one, but shallow angle cuts with your tenon saw will work just as well. These cuts will be hidden in the finished bench, so you can get away with doing a rough job here. Next we'll measure and drill pilot holes for the leg to apron connections. First, mark lines on the apron showing the outside edges of the leg. I'm going to glue and nail these together to make a very rigid bench. Now mark a line 30mm, 1 1/4 inch, down from the top of the apron, followed by another line 110mm, 4 1/4 inch, below the apron's top. Then mark the hole locations 15mm, or 5/8 inch, in from those vertical lines. Now fetch your drill and select a bit to suit the nails or screws you plan to use. Drill the 4 pilot holes to the full depth of the drill bit. Now switch to a 10mm or 3/8 inch spade bit to countersink those holes. I'll use this hole on the spade bit as my depth marker. You'll need to repeat these steps for the other 3 legs. I should have done this earlier. Mark a pencil line around the ends of the struts. This makes it much easier to get them back to their correct positions. Next we'll make the 2 joists for the middle of the bench. These have to be cut as accurately as possible, because if they're too long or too short, the aprons will bend when we fit them. Saw the joist to length using your bench hook and tenon saw. Test fit the joist, and check that it hasn't made the middle of the bench wider than the end. Once you've cut and fitted the second joist, measure and cut the 2 spaces to fit between them. These 2 offcuts should do nicely. Measure and cut the second brace in the same way. Our last step prior to the glue up is to drill pilot holes through the aprons for the joists. Start by marking the position of the strut edge onto the outside of the apron. Then measure the 30mm and 110mm hole positions like we did for the legs. Those lines on my square blade are 10mm from its edge, and 10mm is half the thickness of the joist boards. Pilot drill and countersink these holes the same as we did before. Don't forget to mark and drill your other apron as well. Okay, so after all that preparation, the actual gluing will be a bit anticlimactic. Remove the 6 screws that are holding the front apron and trusses on. Lift off the apron and put your drill safely on the ground where it can't fall any further. Apply and spread PVA glue on the apron and legs. Remove the trusses from the legs. Then apply glue to both ends of each truss. Put the apron back into position and tighten its screws. Now put the struts back into position and retighten their screws. If all these screws go back into their original holes, all the alignments should still be correct. Install the second strut in the same way. I've turned the bench around and glued up the aprons and struts on the other side. So now we can install the joists. Apply some glue to the joist board where it's going to touch the strut end. Install the joist and attach it with one fastener. I'll be using E-Pal nails because I've run out of long screws. Install the second joist in the same way. Then start hammering in the remaining nails. Now turn the bench around and attach the joist to the other apron using the same procedure. Next, apply a layer of glue to the joist brace boards and hold them in place with your hand screw clamps. Install the second joist brace board in the same way. Now you can hammer those joist nails in all the way. I'm using a bolt as a punch to hammer the nails into their countersink holes. Now drive in the nails to attach the aprons to the legs. This nail made a direct hit on one of the nails already in the trestle, so I replaced it with a shorter one. Once you finish driving the remaining nails, you just need to wait for the glue to dry. In the next video, we'll flatten the top of the frame with the plane and attach its top boards. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Tightwad Workshop is filmed in front of a live studio audience.